The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the last Politically Speaking podcast before the elections.
It's the last one.
Just for the elections.
Well, last one just for the elections. We'll
then
be back
we will
next week.
Truly be beyond November.
And I am your host, as always, Chris McDaniel, a political reporter for St. Louis Public Radio.
I am Jason Rosenbaum, a political reporter for the St. Louis Beacon.
And Joe Manis, political reporter for the St. Louis Beacon.
Guys, we're almost there.
To quote the immortal Fred Durst, thank God it's over.
But it's not over yet.
No, it's not.
Well, the final sprint to the finish for both the politicians and the journalists. I know Senator Claire McCaskill and Congressman Todd Akin are both hitting the campaign trail. In fact, Senator McCaskill had her first public appearance since the passing of her mother yesterday. She appeared at Bayless School District, right?
Outside of Bayless. It was on the public property outside Bayless. I talked to the Bayless communications director after that because they wanted to make sure they stayed on public property. And the reason it was picked there, even though most of the retired teachers who were speaking there, the campaign said that it was there mainly just because it'd be easier for reporters and people to be there. They figured people didn't want to be traveling down into Jefferson County. Although the Beacon, I had an in-depth story earlier this week on the importance of Jefferson County, the swing county in the St. Louis area. Right.
And so she was outside of Bayless Elementary, and she was talking about the federal school lunch program.
Yeah.
She was attacking Congressman Akin for being against it. Congressman Akin has said that he wants to transfer that over to the states. He has a go-to line of, I'm sure school lunches don't taste that great, but I'm sure that they taste the same whether it's paid for by the federal or state government.
Well, and her point was that, A, the states don't have the money for that, and B, the school lunch program is tied into the federal purchase of agriculture commodities, extra commodities, and that this was started during the Truman years. And so basically the federal government would be buying extra stuff that farmers had to sell in order to keep the price stable. And so what they were doing was then shifting it to schools to use, like talking cheese, peanut butter, things like that. And she had several retired teachers from Fox School District speaking. But really, the event, while technically about the school lunch program, was really a jumping-off point for her to reaffirm her general line that Todd Akin is too extreme. And, of course, she brought up his calls to privatize Social Security, Medicare, his opposition to the federal involvement in student loans, the stuff that she's been saying on the stump for a while. And she also talked a little bit about it being a little tough since her mother had just died on Monday, and since her mother had been an integral part of McCaskill's campaigns the last few years, and her mother also lived with McCaskill and her husband, so she was involved. And so that was it was an interesting mesh of the classic political attack stuff, but then a little bit of the personal. Now, meanwhile, Todd Akin was across the state in Kansas City with our old friend Newt Gingrich.
Zany.
Who had been here, about a month, 6 weeks ago. Yeah. And Gingrich.
Feels like years ago.
Yeah. And Gingrich's theme in Kansas City was similar to what he had said here. Basically, he was saying that if people elect Todd Akin, this will be a thumb in the eye of the Republican establishment in Washington, and I'll let them know that they can't be trying to manipulate who their grassroots supporters want as their nominees for various office. So I thought it was rather interesting. I mean, Akin and Gingrich did do a little bit of the classic McCaskill's too close to Obama, she's too liberal, those things. But the basic point of attack with Gingrich was that if you're upset with the Republican Party, you elect this guy because this will be a thumb in the eye of the leadership of the Republican Party.
A thumb in the eye to the establishment is sending a U.S. congressman to the Senate?
Yeah. Well,
I'm just going to leave it there. But I understand what you're saying.
Well, and of course the big news. This also fits in a bit with there are now a few leaders, various ways, who are pouring some money into Missouri in this last week.
Yes,
which indicates to me that while I do have some issues with the latest media poll by the Post-Dispatch and Kansas City Star, I'm not sure if it was totally accurate. I'm concerned about some of the demographics. The bottom line is neither side is putting out their internals, and both sides are kind of getting some outside help, which tells you that it's close.
Didn't McCaskill put out her internals like after the Post-Dispatch poll came out?
Right.
So,
let's talk a little bit about the Post-Dispatch. How close was it in there? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was within a few points. It was within 2 points.
Actually, when I was looking at the breakdown, one of the things that I was wondering about was, okay, here's the demographics as far as party ID. It was like 35% Republican, 34% Independent, 31% Democratic. Generally, a poll in Missouri is a little more even between those three. So I thought it potentially may have underreported the Democrats by a point or two. Now, when they do those breakdowns, it's because when they're calling people, they're saying, well, that's the type of response they're getting, that they're not seeing as much enthusiasm among potential Democrats. So that arguably could be right, but it did just raise some questions in my mind, in part because there have been several other independent polls within days that showed it slightly different. And this poll had Romney up by 13, and some of the others I'd seen had Romney up anywhere from between 8 and 10. Because maybe their demographics were a bit off.
Well,
in who they
you
pulled.
alluded to the fact that some outside money is coming in, especially this now or never.
Yes,
ad.
yeah. You want to talk about now or never?
Yeah, now or never was originally conceived to provide some outside help to Sarah Steelman, who was lagging in fundraising, and they used this super PAC to kind of make up.
Primary, it was established last winter.
And then it's gone around the country since then and has dumped money for ads in some high-profile races, like I think Montana is one of them, but also races that are kind of on the margins of competitiveness, like the 8th District in Illinois with Tammy Duckworth and Joe Walsh, which is kind of off the radar in some sense, but they put money into that, and it kind of changed the dynamics of that race and probably sucked up money from Democrats that could have gone elsewhere in Illinois.
Well, because now or never is Republican, so it was helping with
So now they have this ad out that's basically, the message is this: look, Todd Akin might have said some dumb things or something like that, but if you don't vote for him, you're going to have Claire McCaskill, who is not going to be a team player if Romney becomes president. And I think that in the minds of a lot of Republicans who are kind of upset with Akin, everybody who supports Steelman or Bruner, just a Republican who's not that politically involved, they have to have this running dialogue in their head about, are you going to vote for Akin, who's run a campaign just full of missteps and misstatements? With those concerns in mind, are you still going to do that? Are you going to vote for someone like Jonathan Dine? Are you going to leave it blank? That stuff has to be going through the minds of Republicans right now. And I think that ad is kind of towards cajoling them to make that decision and just go toward Akin despite
I
some misgivings.
think the chief target is moderate Republican women because everything I've heard is that those are the group that either are voting for McCaskill or who will not vote for Akin. And this ad, I said it at the beginning, has this glowing couple seconds visual of Romney, and then it says, basically it's saying if you like Mitt Romney, you want to help him out, and the way to help him out is to give him a Republican Senate. And regardless of what Todd Akin has said, the fact is if he's elected, he'll side with Romney on his policies. Now, just as an aside here, Todd Akin, one of the attractions for his base is that Todd Akin has always been extremely independent as well as extremely...
He didn't even endorse McCain after he won, if I recall.
Right, and like when Bush got elected, in fact, one of Akin's talking points is that He was opposed to No Child Left Behind from the beginning. He opposed expanding, for the Medicare drug benefit. So in some ways I thought that was a little humorous, because I thought one of Akin's appeals is that he's such an anti-establishment guy, and I thought to run this ad saying, well, he'll be with Romney, I don't know if that was
I do got to wonder, though, if Romney really does win Missouri by a sizable margin, how many of those people are going to vote for Romney and then McCaskill? I just don't think it's going to be a significant amount.
Correct.
I think the more likely outcome, if people still don't want to vote for Akin, is they'll either vote for Dine as a protest vote, or they just won't vote at all in that race, which is essentially a vote for McCaskill.
Correct, especially since we don't have straight ticket voting, because we got rid of it in 2006 at the behest of Republicans, so people have to go down through each race.
Yeah, and Congressman Akin was actually holding an event on Monday where he was attacking McCaskill for her stance on the EPA.
Yes.
Specifically pointing to two bills that would have limited the power of the EPA. Now, I think what was most interesting out of that event was he was bashing the EPA, which is a pretty typical Republican talking point, especially in Missouri.
And he was accompanied by Senator Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma. Right. Go ahead.
And although he was bashing the EPA, he stopped just short of saying that he thought it should be completely done away with. He was saying that it should be restructured, was what he said, and whether that
I was pressing him on that.
Yeah, and whether that is completely done away with or starting anew, it's a technicality.
But I think it has to be said here, and I think that a lot of ads are saying that Todd Akin will have these magical powers to, make his agenda happen. Just because he gets elected to the Senate doesn't mean he can actually implement his ideas or ideology. In fact, I would guess if the Senate is 51 to 49 either way, there's probably not going to be a whole lot of things done in that body, regardless of whether Todd Akin or Claire McCaskill win. But
of course
I will say
it's demonstrative of his views.
Yeah, and I think on the other hand, though, if you have somebody who's spouting off and is kind of on the fringes of policy debate there, then you've got to wonder how effective they're going to be. Not saying that Todd Akin is on the fringe of everything, but on some of his views, they just might not be in line with anybody's, and he might just be kind of a voice in the wilderness, sort of like how Rand Paul is at times with his place in the Senate. So,
Rand Paul likes him, so he'll have at least one or two allies if he's in the Senate.
Well, back to the McCaskill event that took place yesterday. In fact, at that event, Joe Mannies was asking Senator McCaskill if she's worried about low voter turnout, especially since you did a story about how absentee voting is down by about half. Am I correct?
Well, this was just in St. Louis and St. Louis County. I checked with the election authorities, and in the city of St. Louis, now this is as of earlier this week, absentee balloting was running less than half of what it was at the same point 4 years ago in 2008, when you had a number of urban voters, especially African Americans in St. Louis, who were very energized by the idea of a President Barack Obama. In St. Louis County, it looked like it was running maybe 30% below. So in the county, it may get a little closer to its overall figure in 2008, where about 72,000 absentee votes were cast in St. Louis County in 2008. It looks like they might hit the high 50s, maybe 60, but that's still down. And while people point to the fact that Missouri doesn't have early voting and that you're supposed to have a reason to vote absentee, and that's true, but the fact is the numbers do indicate that enthusiasm is down.
Because it's the same system in 2008 as it is now.
Correct. So the numbers don't lie. Now, I'm not saying that those are necessarily Democrats, especially in St. Louis County. You can't say for sure. But in the city, which is like 90% Democrat, right, I think there's no question that does signal lower enthusiasm. Now, there has been a lot of rumblings within Democratic ranks, because my story also included some comments from Congressman Lacey Clay, who I talked to about 10 days ago, who said that he blames some of it on the fact that, A, there was no presidential campaign in the state to energize urban voters, and B, he contended that there wasn't enough coordination with the state Democratic Party and some of the local Democratic groups. Now, that's caused a behind-the-scenes firestorm, some contentions about who's being active, who's not. I'm not going to put out any unfounded rumors, but there's tons of that out there. But the bottom line is that Clay, who had been campaigning in some other states for the Congress, for Obama, is supposed to now be back in Missouri as we speak, and supposedly he's going to be among those the last few days, helping out various other Democratic candidates on the ballot. For Democrats, it's very important that they get a solid turnout from African Americans in St. Louis and Kansas City. It's not just the percentage. I mean, this reminds me of 2004. John Kerry got the classic 80%, 85% percentage in the city of St. Louis, but the numbers were down because not so many people came out.
Right.
Kerry ended up losing the state by close to 250,000 votes. So it's not just the percentage, it's also the numbers. They need those people to turn out and vote. So that's one thing that people will be watching. Both parties, by the way, are doing these big rally-type things. The Republicans are starting a bus tour even as we speak, and that should be in St. Louis later Friday. And the Democrats are having some events, and theirs is supposed to be Saturday.
Yeah. And you got to wonder what, for example, the presidential race coattails. And we talk about it with McCaskill and Akin a lot because I think it's the natural thing below the president's race. But you talk about these statewide races where you have the governor, the lieutenant governor, secretary of state, et cetera. You know, there could be some candidates who have just built up enough financial resources to where they're kind of able to withstand kind of a lower turnout, maybe like Nixon or Coster or something like that. But for someone like Susan Monty, who's challenging an incumbent, or
Lieutenant Governor,
or Jason Kander trying to win an open seat against Shane Schiller for Secretary of State, I don't know if the margins are that high for Romney. And you're talking about people going down the ballot. We've talked before, not everybody goes down the ballot that
right,
far.
so there's a drop-off.
So there's that. And the one race I really think people need to pay attention to is that treasurer's race. Because by all logic, Zweifel should have the advantage just because he has a 10-to-1 advantage overall in money.
Yeah, he's the Democratic incumbent.
Versus Cole McNary. But in the last couple of days, I've noticed that Cole McNary has gotten some sizable donations, both from like the Humphreys family of Joplin. I think he got a $50,000 one. He's on TV now. And I think that his father's name recognition from being Gene McNary, the former St. Louis County executive, he's run statewide 3 times. I think McNary might cut into Zweifel's margin in St. Louis County more than Brad Lager did in 2008. I'm not saying that's going to cause him to win or lose, but that race could be, closer than expected for an incumbent running for re-election. Because a lot of times for those down ballot races, they run the people who run for re-election usually win by a large percentage. But I think that time in Missouri may have passed where someone can run for re-election and it's going to just be close now or something like that.
And you can't discount the familiarity of a name when people are going in and they're looking at these down ballots and they don't really know that much about them. Maybe they saw a couple of the ads, maybe they didn't. This reminds me of 2000 when Steve Gaw, who was a Democrat, then Speaker of the House, was running for Secretary of State against Matt Blunt, who was just a state rep. But Matt Blunt was the son of Roy Blunt, who had served 2 terms as Secretary of State. And at that time, Roy Blunt was a member of Congress, but it wasn't like he was well known everywhere because Roy hadn't been on a statewide ballot in a while. But still, that Blunt name, Matt Blunt was the one Republican who won, aside from George W. Bush at the top. Those were the only 2 Republican victors. And Matt Blunt even carried St. Louis County. And the general consensus afterwards was because there was just enough of that name recognition.
And also, I just don't think people like us know who Steve Gaw is, but I'm not sure if people can name the Speaker of the House for the Missouri House. I mean, I think it's not as much name recognition as you think. And I don't know if that can same to be said for state treasurer, but it is kind of a lower key statewide office than, say, attorney general or governor. Yes. So maybe that incumbency really doesn't hold as much as those offices. But I will just say, from all metrics, when you look at money, when you look at just his wife hasn't been in a big scandal or anything that would just cause him
and
automatically to lose.
he has strong labor ties, and labor is supposed to be trying to do a lot this election cycle to help certain Democrats on the ballot.
But I just wanted to point that out there. If people look at the results and see that race closer than, say, other statewide races, that would probably be one of the hypotheses people can point out. So
yes, I think it's going to be very interesting because, as you've mentioned before, if Romney has a high percentage in the state,
right,
that potentially could have an impact. Now, again, it depends. If people either leave the Akin McCaskill thing empty, or they vote for McCaskill, then they go to Nixon, and Nixon is expected, Jay Nixon, who's Democrat running for re-election for governor, if he gets, as expected, some Republicans to vote for him instead of Dave Spence, who's a St. Louis businessman, who's the Republican, that could also have an effect down the ballot, potentially. Although Spence is...
He's putting some serious money into his last push.
Yeah, put in an extra $1 million.
And some of the polls look like he's surging when he needs to be in order to make it competitive.
I don't know. But I will just say this, and I don't want to make any grand predictions or anything because I don't want to look like an idiot next week when I come on this show. But I will just say that if Romney gets the 54% or more that was in that Post-Dispatch poll, I would say Democrats need to be concerned across the board for their other candidates. I'm not saying they're going to lose. I'm not saying a specific candidate is going to win. But I would say that is a pretty sizable and not unprecedented margin, as Joe is going to point out in just a second.
Yes.
But that's a percentage that hasn't been seen since Ronald Reagan in 1984 when he won the state with 60% of the vote.
Correct.
And I don't know how, not only talking about statewide, we're talking about state Senate races. I don't. If that happens, I don't see Joe Fallard or Terry Swinger or even Mary Still winning under those circumstances. I don't see them winning.
Those are state Senate.
I don't
candidates.
see. I see some incumbent state Democrats in the rural areas losing under those circumstances. And even if Nixon wins, he's going to have the same thing he had the last 2 years of just huge Republican majorities in the legislature. You got to wonder what he'll get done in those 2 years besides just following the lead of the legislature and vetoing stuff.
But on the other hand, I think, now Spence, his problem, we're just talking tactically here, regardless of the issues. He's from the St. Louis area, and candidates from the St. Louis area are always looked on as suspicion out of state, and especially Republicans. I personally think that that's one of the things that probably hurt John Brunner in the primary. Mm-hmm. Now, it didn't hurt Akin, because he has this evangelical support from homeschoolers and that sort of thing. But I think it'll be interesting to see. I think this is one of the reasons that Spence is spending a lot of time outstate and in this Republican stronghold so that they can see him and see that he's not, the typical, I'm being facetious here, the typical Republican politician. At the same time, Labor does not want him. And they're really, because he's saying he's for right to work.
And I will just say conversely, if that margin that Romney gets is lower than what was polled in that poll, let's say it's 50 or 51%, or even 49, 47 or something, still okay compared to the last one because I guess McCain only won by a couple thousand votes.
Yes.
Then I think you might see the results a little bit less extreme across the board. So you may see Democrats winning some things. You might see Republicans winning some offices. There won't be I think under those circumstances, it's a little bit less herky-jerky, so to speak.
Let's revisit 1984
Yes.
when Reagan got 60% of the vote. In fact, McCaskill brought this up at the event yesterday. In 1984, the same year that Ronald Reagan got 60% of the vote, John Ashcroft, who's Republican running for governor, won. But who was elected lieutenant governor? And John Ashcroft was extremely conservative and was running that year as a staunch conservative.
Not Margaret Kelly.
Harriet Woods, who was an unabashed progressive and state senator from University City. And as McCaskill points out, she said both of them won that same year that Reagan had this big landslide. And that's when we had straight ticket voting.
Right.
Harriet still won. Now, a little trivia contest here. Reagan, although he got 60% of the vote, I kind of took a jump off from Jason bringing this up last week. I did a little research. Reagan's percentage, 60%, was actually the sixth largest percentage in Missouri history by a presidential candidate, Victor. Now, just a little, can you imagine it all? Who was number one in what year?
Oh, I know the answer to this. It's my great friend, William Howard Taft.
Actually, it's Andrew Jackson, who in 1832, and this was in the height of, Andrew Jackson was the ultimate anti-establishment candidate. He got 70.6% of the vote in 1832 in Missouri.
Must have been that giant wheel of cheese that he had at his inauguration.
Now, coming in second, the second highest percentage was Abraham Lincoln in 1864. He got 69.7% of Missouri's vote.
Stovepipe hat was definitely
right.
a deal.
But only 4 years earlier, in 1860, his first bid, Abraham Lincoln was creamed by every other presidential candidate running in Missouri and got less than 11% of the vote. It's like 10 point something.
I forgot who won the state that year. I don't know if it was Bell or Breckinridge, but they voted for somebody with a B.
Right,
that's for sure.
Right. And then now the third was actually my lifetime, not in yours, was Lyndon Johnson, who got 64% in 1964.
Must have been the profanity.
Now, this was just a few months after the assassination of JFK, and so there was a lot of wave going on, and Johnson was promising to continue the JFK legacy. The fourth, we have to skip back, is actually FDR. The first time he ran for president, he got 63.7% of the vote in 1932 against Hoover. Herbert Hoover, who got lost. And then the fifth was Nixon.
Against McGovern.
Richard M. Nixon, against McGovern in 1972. Richard M. Nixon got 62% of the vote. Then coming in sixth was Reagan in 1984.
Right.
A little bit of trivia here.
Yes.
In some historical context.
I will just flat out just say I don't think Romney has any chance of getting to Andrew Jackson type numbers, or even Reagan numbers. If Missouri goes 60% for Romney, I would just be flabbergasted. In fact, I probably would eat my own shoe or something like that.
Careful.
All right, you heard it here first.
Be careful.
I said probably. I didn't say I would.
Yes,
but I'm
always wary about predictions.
But still, that's some good context to have about how the state can either be extremely close, like in 2008, or it can be kind of in the middle, like 2004, 2000.
Right.
Or it could just be blowouts like 1832.
Yeah, and actually, it was interesting when Clinton carried the state in both times in 1992
I don't think he
and
broke
1996.
50%.
He didn't break 50%. He didn't. Actually, in Missouri, he didn't come close, but it was in the high 40s, very similar to what he got nationwide, but he did not break 50.
Perot-mania.
Well, we will be back next Wednesday, most likely, possibly Thursday, to give our election post wrap-up, if you will. But most importantly, next Tuesday, make sure you go out and vote. And even more importantly, make sure you go to beyondnovember.org and look through the voter's guide there. You can put in your address, and it gives you a sample ballot where all of the candidates stand, and it has links to all of our stories.
Yes, beyondnovember.org. And just think, next week you will know whether or not Jason has to eat some of his shoe.
We should probably be clear that Joe and I are making no predictions. We will have no shoes to eat.
No.
I'm pretty safe that my shoe is not going to be eaten on that one. But you know what?
Exuding confidence.
This is why you don't make predictions. This is why you just make general thoughts of possibilities based off things. That was a great sentence, by the way.
Yes. Well, you'll have to tune in next week to see if Jason to listen to the audio of Jason eating his own shoe, possibly. But until then, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at CS McDaniel. Jason is
at J Rosenbaum.
And I'm at J Manis.
Until next week, make sure you go out and vote. So long.
So long. Democracy lives.
Vote, fool.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. all the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.